speaking of, bogus propaganda and regime change coups, before we get to Venezuela, you mentioned you were covering Iran. I don't know how many times I've seen, regime change, revolution. There's mass protests in the street, and it's usually never translated into that. Usually the protests aren't even about that. My understanding of these protests, they start as economic protests due to currency issues. So the government's attempt to basically reduce certain subsidies in certain areas. But it was not we want to overthrow Iran and have the son of the Shah come back. That bum, even Rudy Giuliani said that son of the Shah is a joke. But the amount of fake propaganda, people were putting out videos from Canada, putting out videos from the BLM protest, people from all around them pretending it was what was happening on the streets of Tehran. My understanding is there's been more counter protest in favor of the government. And then, in fact, the best thing you can do if you wanted to hold up this regime to keep it in power is to have the U.S. government threaten invasions and bombing every other day, because people tend to respond patriotically, even if they may disagree with their particular government in power in Tehran. But what's your take on what's happened? It looks to me like this is petering out very quickly because of the U.S. threat of intervention has led to those protests diminishing and counter-protests surging in favor of the government, from what I can tell. But what has your research found so far?
Well, based on Iranian sources, last night was the quietest night across the country. These protests began in early January. And as you said, Robert, they were a response to economic conditions, inflation, and the plummeting value of the rial, which is brought on by U.S. sanctions. U.S. sanctions have destroyed the Iranian economy. So if you're a middle-class, highly educated young Iranian, you can't go buy a new car now. You're working longer and longer hours for less and less. And then in the markets, the merchants are feeling it the most strongly, and they wanted some kind of government support. And then you have a reformist president, Pezeshkian, and they don't know which side he stands on. Many of these merchants who started the protests, this is the crazy thing, support the Islamic Republic and are actually what you might consider hardliners. And protests are kind of normal in Iran. So they went out and protested. The government and the leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, responded kind of sympathetically to them. And then with lots of people in the street, another element started to come into the equation and completely superseded these protests. And it was a very nihilistic, violent regime change element, which also did include young people who feel sort of directionless and without a future. And they have rioted in cities across Iran and killed, according to the government, and I think these are conservative numbers, at least 100 security officers, police officers. They've beaten to death unarmed security guards on camera. I tweeted some of that out. It's horrible to watch. Large mobs of masked men just beating people to death who are trying to stop looting. They have burned mosques across Tehran and historic mosques throughout the city. Historic libraries have been burned. Fire stations have been burned. Firefighters have been burned alive. Fire trucks, ambulances, emergency workers, government workers have been abused and killed. The Shah, the self-proclaimed Shah or Clown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who is kind of like my neighbor here in the Washington, D.C. area. He lives in a mansion over in Potomac. He has actually called for killing government workers in a tweet. So it's not like they're hiding their intent to commit violence. But the U.S. media, Western media, they're hiding this violence, and they're relying on NGOs funded by the National Endowment for Democracy for their death count, which seems to conflate the total death toll. And I'm not denying the government, maybe its security forces may be firing on rioters and protesters and killing people. And you have like this official death toll now of 5,000. You have people closer to Trump just going online and saying 20,000 are dead without any sourcing at all, because they want to exaggerate the intensity of the riots and protests in order to convince Trump that now's the time to go in. But here's the reality. I mean, I'll put it in a perspective I think anyone watching this can understand, regardless of what you think about Iran or me. If you are in the United States or Europe or Canada or wherever, would you tolerate masked gangs doing that in your own cities and beating cops to death and burning down government buildings that you might use to go get your driver's license, burning down schools, burning churches. I mean, they're burning mosques in a primarily Muslim country. These are nihilistic elements. And so to the extent that there is government repression and they want to put these protests and riots to an end very quickly because of the pressure of a war from the US and Israel, to the extent that there is repression, it's a response to riots, and our media isn't showing us the level of violence. Like, I don't think any American would support it. I think even most left-wing Americans, if they saw that kind of violence in their cities, would say this has to be put to a stop. But you're at a point in Iran where it's aiming to destabilize the entire country to pave way for the US and Israel to bomb the crap out of them. And that's not just me saying that. That's the private CIA contractor known as Stratfor, which published a January 7th intelligence assessment declaring, do I have it in front of me? I have it right in front of me. This is the headline: protests in Iran provide a window for US and/or Israeli intervention. That is the entire point of these protests. The Mossad has put out a message declaring that we are involved in these protests, that we are helping you. They're not hiding it at all. Mike Pompeo, former CIA director, has said Mossad is walking alongside these protesters. And we're seeing like men armed with assault weapons in the middle of Iranian cities who are clearly militarized. So the goal of this is to carry on the chaos for as long as possible, to get Trump to enter. That's Israel's goal. That's the goal of some of these elements who are rioting. There are other elements who may not know what they're doing and are just feeling hopeless, angry, or nihilistic, but that's where it's going. And to your question, Robert, I think we might have seen the last legs of this round of protests and riots.
I pulled up that video just to show the video. That actually was a woman in I believe it was Brampton, Ontario. It was a picture in Canada because Iranian women wouldn't dress like that. But you speak of the propaganda, or at least the cherry picking or exaggeration of details on one side and the other. And on the one hand, like my question to you is, it is normal. I say normal. You say the left wouldn't necessarily tolerate that type of violence on the streets. I might disagree with you. I might think that, the summer of love, depending on where they direct that violence, it would be very welcome against what they feel to be their oppressors. Beating to death of these.
You mean 68 or BLM? Like which?
Well, I mean, I say like elements of the left that would view ICE, for example, the same way that perhaps these Iranians view their tormentors. I mean, I say it's not analogous. The idea that some might say, let them beat their tormentors in the street. I mean, that's how else do you break free from that regime, or how do you break free from that reign? And I mean, it seems like what you're describing is a problem in terms of the solution. The Iranian regime is a problem. Protests overthrowing them would open the door for Israel or Mossad or America, if that's the end goal, or at least the opportunistic element of it. What's the solution to what's going on in Iran if armed uprising is a problem and the regime is a problem?
Well, I don't share this analysis that the regime is a problem to Israel or I mean, they're defending their own strategic depth from countries that have tried to destroy them for decades, and prior to the Islamic Revolution had exploited their oil after toppling the elected president Mossadegh in 1953 through Operation Ajax. So there's a whole history there. I was in Iran in May. I spoke at a conference called the Sobe International Media Festival. I was there completely independently on my own dime, and I got to see the country and travel around. And one thing I saw that anyone can see, if you just go on YouTube right now and search for shopping mall in Tehran, search the real Iran, and you'll find tons of videos of people walking around Iran. These are getting really popular on YouTube. And you see like at least half the women in the streets are not wearing hijab. They've just decided to take it off. And I didn't see anything happening to them or any price for that. I was there with my family too. So my wife wasn't wearing hijab except in like official buildings. And that's one of the major grievances relating to freedom in Iran, but these protests don't relate to a specific grievance. So, things will reform inside Iran internally. And there has been, when I was there, actually, the conservative pro-Islamic Republic forces, some of them were holding little protests demanding that the government do more to enforce the hijab because they weren't enforcing it anymore. And it felt like they were kind of on the back foot. Then a month later, Israel attacks out of nowhere, killing commanders, killing nuclear scientists. Mossad cells that had infiltrated deeply inside Iran were carrying out car bomb attacks. Civilians were being killed. And much of this society rallied around the flag and became more nationalistic than ever, including many elements that did not support the Islamic Republic, but who were Iranian nationalists. I met many people there who didn't like the IRI, but were considered themselves Iranian patriots. And you're going to have that effect again if the U.S. and Israel bombs. Stratfor, in its assessment, said that Israeli or U.S. bombing will end the protests for good and will produce massive amounts of unity. But Robert, as he mentioned, there are these large demonstrations in Iran that also are ignored by Western media. Over 1 million people were in the streets of Tehran today, like a substantial percentage of the city's population. And they are supporting the Iranian the Islamic Republic. And that means that you have a society that, like ours, is polarized. And for foreign forces to go in and try to just completely remove a government and ignore the fact that a large segment of the population actually supports it, and that government is not just one leader, it means you're going to destabilize the entire country, and you will create chaos throughout the entire region that will make Libya look like a Shriners parade.